Have you ever thought about what happens when marriage becomes about taking instead of giving? When the body of your spouse stops being a sacred gift and becomes something you think you own? And what did Padre Pio, the priest who could see straight into souls, witness about marriages that lost their way? Throughout the 20th century, millions of couples stood at the altar and promised to love, honor, and cherish each other until death. But somewhere between the vows and the years that followed, something shifted for many of them. The gift became a right, the person became property, and the sacred became selfish. Padre Pio of Pietrelcina understood this tragedy better than most. For 58 years, from 1910 until his death in 1968, he sat in the confessional at the monastery of Our Lady of Grace in San Giovanni Rotondo. During the busiest years between 1918 and 1923, he heard confessions 15 to 19 hours every single day. By the time he died, he had heard approximately 5 million confessions. But here's what made him different. Padre Pio didn't just hear sins, he saw them. He had the gift of reading hearts, a supernatural ability that let him perceive the state of souls, sometimes revealing sins people had forgotten or hidden even from themselves. Witnesses documented cases where he told penitents exactly what they had done, when they had done it, and the circumstances surrounding it, all before they opened their mouths. And among the thousands of sins he encountered day after day, there was one category that disturbed him deeply: sins against marriage. Sins against the sacred covenant. Sins that turned the body from a gift into a possession. If you value these deep spiritual stories, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched using sources from Father Stefano Manelli's biography, Padre Pio of Pietrelcina, published by the Franciscans of the Immaculate, and C. Bernard Ruffin's comprehensive work, Padre Pio, The True Story, which drew from sworn testimonies of those who lived with Padre Pio and knew him intimately, including Father Joseph Pius Martin, who served as one of his closest collaborators for decades. These aren't popular sources. These are the deep archives. Now, back to the information. One morning in San Giovanni Rotondo, a man entered Padre Pio's confessional. Let's call him Antonio. He was a businessman from Naples, successful, respected in his community, married for 12 years. He came to confession because his wife had begged him to go, threatening to leave if he didn't seek spiritual help. Antonio knelt down and began listing his sins. Minor things. Missing Mass twice. Losing his temper at work. A lie he told about a business deal. Padre Pio listened in silence. Then he interrupted. His voice was low but cut like steel. "You're not telling me everything," Antonio stammered. "Father, I've confessed what I remember." "Then let me help you remember," Padre Pio said. The priest's eyes, witnesses said, seemed to look through people, not at them. "Tell me about how you treat your wife." Antonio shifted uncomfortably. "I provide for her. She has everything she needs." "Everything?" Padre Pio's voice rose slightly. "You think marriage is about providing a house and food? You think because you pay the bills, her body belongs to you? You take what you want, when you want it, without tenderness, without asking, without love. You treat her like a servant in your bed, like an object, like property you own." Antonio went pale. These were thoughts he'd never spoken aloud, things he assumed were private, beyond anyone's knowledge. But here was this priest describing the exact darkness of his marriage, the way he demanded intimacy without affection, the way he ignored his wife's tears, the way he believed that the marriage vows gave him unrestricted access to her body, regardless of how she felt. "Father, I didn't know." "You didn't know?" Padre Pio cut him off. "You didn't know that she is a person, a daughter of God, that her body is a temple of the Holy Spirit? You think the sacrament of marriage gave you ownership?" The priest leaned closer to the confessional grill. "Marriage gave you a gift, and you've been abusing it." This encounter, like thousands of others, revealed Padre Pio's understanding of what marriage was meant to be. He saw it through the lens of Catholic teaching, yes, but also through the lens of someone who could perceive the spiritual damage caused when spouses forgot they were dealing with souls, not possessions. The Catholic understanding of marriage that Padre Pio upheld was rooted in the idea of mutual self, gift. St. Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 3 and 4 that husband and wife should give each other their conjugal rights, and that neither has authority over their own body alone. But this passage, Padre Pio understood, was often twisted. People read conjugal rights and thought it meant, I can take what I want. They missed the word give. Give, not take. Give. The whole passage was about generosity, about each spouse looking to the good of the other. It was about two people who had freely chosen to make a gift of themselves to one another. Total gift, complete gift. A gift given in love, renewed each day, offered with tenderness. But what Padre Pio witnessed in the confessional was often the opposite. He saw men who thought marriage meant unrestricted access. He saw women who withheld intimacy as punishment or manipulation. He saw couples who had turned the marriage bed into a battlefield of control, resentment, and selfishness. One of the friars, who lived with Padre Pio, Father Alessio Parente, later testified that Padre Pio would sometimes emerge from hours in the confessional looking physically exhausted, as though he had been carrying heavy weights. When asked what troubled him most, Padre Pio mentioned several categories: sacrilege, blasphemy, abortion, the limitation of families through contraception. But he also mentioned something else: coldness between spouses, the death of love in marriage, the reduction of the sacred to the mechanical. They forget, Padre Pio once said to a group of spiritual children, that matrimony is for children. It's meant to populate earth and paradise. But how can you cooperate with God's creative power when you treat your spouse with less dignity than you'd treat a stranger on the street? In 1950, a couple named Giovanni and Paola Siena came to Padre Pio for his blessing on their marriage. They were young, in love, full of hope. On August 27, 1950, during a mass celebrated at 5 in the morning, Padre Pio blessed their union. He looked at them with tears in his eyes and repeated 3 times, "Be happy, be happy, be happy." But he also gave them advice that would sustain them through 60 years of marriage. Pray together every day, he told them. See each other the way God sees you. Remember that you are not your own. You belong to each other now, and both of you belong to God. Years later, Paola would say that this advice, this vision of marriage as a continuous act of mutual gift-giving, was what saved them during difficult times. When Giovanni annoyed her, when she annoyed him, when money was tight, when children were sick, when temptation came. They returned to this idea: you are a gift. I am a gift. We don't own each other. We give ourselves to each other, fresh, every single day. This was the vision Padre Pio fought for in the confessional. This was why he sometimes raised his voice. This was why he sometimes refused absolution until people truly understood what they had done wrong. Understanding how Padre Pio approached these situations requires understanding the times he lived in. Post-war Italy was rebuilding. Families were large. Resources were scarce. The cultural pressures on marriage were enormous. Men worked long hours. Women managed households with minimal help. Exhaustion was common. Resentment built easily. And into this pressure cooker of domestic life came ancient misunderstandings about marital rights. For centuries, popular Catholic culture had sometimes emphasized duty over gift. Wives were told to submit. Husbands were told they had rights. The language of obligation overshadowed the language of love. Padre Pio saw through this. He understood that while St. Paul did speak of conjugal duties in 1 Corinthians, the context was mutual service, not one-sided domination. Both spouses had duties, both had rights, but more importantly, both had the obligation to love, which meant seeking the good of the other, not using the other. The Italian word Padre Pio often used was donazione, gift, donation, the giving of oneself. He would tell couples in spiritual direction that every aspect of marriage should be characterized by this spirit of donazione, not just the physical union, but everything. The way you speak to each other, the way you make decisions, the way you handle money, the way you parent. Everything should flow from the understanding that you are giving yourself as a gift. But the marriage bed, he emphasized, was where this truth was most clearly revealed or most clearly violated. Because physical intimacy is so powerful, so vulnerable, so potentially beautiful or potentially damaging, it becomes the test case for whether a couple has truly understood the nature of their covenant. One priest who worked alongside Padre Pio at the monastery remembered him saying, "The bedroom is a sanctuary or a battlefield. There is no middle ground. Either the couple enters it as 2 people bringing gifts to the altar, or they enter it as 2 people grabbing for themselves. And you can tell which it is by looking at their faces when they come to confession." What did he mean by that? The priest explained that Padre Pio could often discern the state of a marriage by the expression on a person's face. Those who came from marriages of mutual gift, even if those marriages had struggles in other areas, had a certain peace, a certain softness. Even when confessing difficulties, there was an underlying unity. But those who came from marriages characterized by selfishness, by taking, by the treatment of the spouse as property, these people had different faces, harder, more closed, more defensive, and often they didn't even realize what was wrong. They thought they were following the rules. They thought because they weren't committing adultery, weren't getting divorced, weren't doing anything technically forbidden, they were good Catholic spouses. Padre Pio had to open their eyes, had to show them that you can violate the spirit of marriage while following the letter of the law. You can stay faithful to your spouse while treating them with cruelty. You can fulfill your conjugal duties while draining every ounce of love from the act. There was a woman from Florence who came to confess in 1956. She had been married 8 years and was miserable. Her husband, she said, was cold, demanding, unaffectionate except when he wanted physical intimacy. She felt used. She felt like an object. And so she had begun withholding herself from him. Not just physically, emotionally, spiritually. She had shut down completely. Padre Pio listened. Then he surprised her. "Your husband is wrong in how he treats you," he said, "but you are also wrong in how you respond. Two wrongs don't heal a marriage. They kill it," she protested. "Father, what am I supposed to do? Let him continue to treat me this way?" "No," Padre Pio said firmly. "You speak to him, you tell him the truth with love, you pray for him, you seek counsel. But you don't turn your heart to ice. That helps no one. Not him, not you, not your children, and certainly not your soul." He gave her a penance, not just prayers. He told her to go home and, before she confronted her husband about his failures, to examine her own heart, to ask herself where she had stopped seeing him as a gift from God, where she had started viewing him as an enemy to defeat. "Marriage," Padre Pio told her, "is a mirror. You see yourself reflected in your spouse. If you see only ugliness, ask yourself what ugliness you're projecting. Then work to change it. Then, when you've softened your own heart, you can help soften his." The woman left in tears, but she followed his advice. Months later, she returned to San Giovanni Rotondo with her husband. Both of them made their confession to Padre Pio. Both received absolution. And both later testified that their marriage had been saved not by one person changing, but by both of them remembering what they had forgotten, that they were gifts, that their bodies, their hearts, their whole selves were meant to be given freely, not taken forcefully. Padre Pio's vision of marriage was demanding. He didn't offer easy comfort. He didn't tell people what they wanted to hear. He told them what their souls needed. And what their souls needed, more often than not, was to hear that selfishness is the death of love, that you cannot build a marriage on taking, that the moment you start viewing your spouse's body as something you're entitled to rather than something freely given, you've stopped participating in the sacrament. You've turned something holy into something profane. The Catholic Church has always taught this, though the language has evolved. In the early Church, St. John Chrysostom wrote that a husband who loves his wife should be willing to die for her, modeling his love on Christ's love for the Church, not a love that takes, a love that gives everything. Chrysostom, preaching in Constantinople in the late 4th century, told husbands something radical for his time. He said that a man who strikes his wife strikes Christ, that a man who dishonors his wife dishonors the Church, that physical strength gives no rights over the weaker vessel, but rather increases responsibility to protect and cherish. He wrote in his homily on Ephesians, "Do you want your wife to be obedient? Then be a responsible husband. Do all things on your part. Overcome her with love and affection. Show her that you honor her more than your own soul. Make her see that you set great value on companionship with her. If she perceives that you value her company, she will not refuse yours." This wasn't about manipulation. It was about modeling Christ's love. Christ doesn't force the Church to love him. He woos her. He serves her. He dies for her. He gives everything and asks that she freely respond. This was the model for husbands, and by extension for wives toward their husbands. St. Augustine, writing in North Africa in the early 5th century, developed the doctrine of the three goods of marriage: offspring, fidelity, sacrament. But he made clear that these goods were not isolated from love. A marriage that produced children but lacked fidelity violated the good of fidelity. A marriage that maintained fidelity but treated the spouse cruelly violated the good of sacrament, which requires the couple to image Christ and the Church. Augustine wrote that in marriage, couples should approach intimacy with a certain reverence, understanding that they were participating in something sacred. The body was not to be despised, as the Manichaean heretics taught, but neither was it to be worshipped or indulged without restraint. It was to be honored as the temple of the Holy Spirit and shared as a gift between spouses who had covenanted to become one flesh. In the Middle Ages, St. Thomas Aquinas wrote about the mutual debt of marriage, but emphasized that this debt was rooted in justice and charity, not in raw ownership. Each spouse owed the other love, respect, tenderness, not just physical presence, but emotional and spiritual presence. Aquinas addressed a question that revealed the misunderstandings of his time. Some men asked, "Can I demand my conjugal rights for my wife whenever I want?" Aquinas answered carefully. He said that while neither spouse should unreasonably refuse the other, the request itself should be made with charity, with awareness of the other's state, with sensitivity to circumstances. He specifically warned against husbands who approached their wives with such roughness or at such inappropriate times that the wives would be harmed physically or spiritually. He said that a husband who insisted on his rights without regard for his wife's well-being was acting sinfully, even if technically he was within the bounds of the marital debt. Aquinas also addressed the reverse situation. Wives who withheld themselves as punishment or to manipulate. He said this too was a violation of charity. The conjugal debt, he wrote, is owed in justice, but it should be rendered in love. Both the asking and the giving should be characterized by mutual concern for the good of the other. This teaching was profound for the 13th century. It cut against the common assumptions that men could do whatever they wanted with their wives, or that women had no say in the matter. Aquinas insisted on mutual respect, mutual service, mutual gift. In the 20th century, Pope Pius XI wrote the encyclical Casti Connubii in 1930. He described marriage as a union of souls, even more than bodies. He wrote that by matrimony, the souls of the contracting parties are joined and knit together more directly and more intimately than their bodies. This wasn't romantic fluff. It was theological precision. The physical union in marriage, Pius XI taught, is meant to express and deepen the spiritual union. When the physical act is separated from spiritual communion, when it becomes merely biological, it falls short of what God intended. It may not be sinful in the technical sense, but it's impoverished, diminished, less than it should be. Pius XI also addressed the modern temptation to view marriage primarily as a means of personal happiness. He warned against a selfish love that seeks its own satisfaction rather than the good of the spouse and the good of the family. He wrote that true love in marriage is not found in selfish pleasure, but in mutual sacrifice, in the daily dying to self that allows two people to become truly one. And later, Pope John Paul II would develop his Theology of the Body, delivered in 129 addresses between 1979 and 1984. He would speak extensively about the nuptial meaning of the body, about how the human body is designed for self-gift, how sexual union in marriage is meant to be a total giving of self, holding nothing back. John Paul explored the opening chapters of Genesis, looking at Adam and Eve before the fall. He noted that they were naked without shame. Why? Because they saw each other correctly. They saw each other as persons, as gifts from God, as unique and unrepeatable revelations of divine love. There was no lust because there was no desire to possess or use. There was only the desire to give and receive in love. After the fall, John Paul noted, shame entered. Why? Because lust entered. The desire to use rather than love. The temptation to view the other as an object for my satisfaction rather than a person with inherent dignity. This is what John Paul called the fundamental disorder introduced by sin into human sexuality. But redemption in Christ, John Paul taught, makes it possible to recover something of the original vision. Not perfectly, not completely in this life, but really, through grace, through the sacrament of marriage, through the daily practice of virtue, spouses can learn to see each other again with purity of heart, can learn to give themselves as total gifts, can learn to receive each other with reverence and gratitude. This entire tradition, from Chrysostom to Augustine to Aquinas to Pius XI to John Paul II, formed the background of Padre Pio's teaching. He didn't invent these ideas. He simply lived them, preached them, and enforced them in the confessional with the particular charism God had given him, the ability to read hearts. But Padre Pio didn't need theological treatises to understand this. He saw it. He saw it in the souls that came to him, broken, damaged, wounded by years of selfish treatment. He saw it in the marriages that were dying, because one or both spouses had forgotten that love is not about possession, but about donation. A friar once asked Padre Pio what the most common sin against marriage was. The friar expected Padre Pio to say adultery, or contraception, or divorce. But Padre Pio said something else. Indifference, he replied. The slow death of not caring. The husband who comes to view his wife as furniture. The wife who sees her husband as a wallet or a chore. The couple who share a bed but have stopped sharing their hearts. This indifference, Padre Pio explained, is what opens the door to everything else. When you stop seeing your spouse as a unique, unrepeatable, irreplaceable gift from God, you start treating them as replaceable. And then the temptations come. The affairs, the fantasies, the bitterness, the slow unraveling of the covenant. The friar pressed him. But, Father, isn't indifference less serious than adultery? At least the indifferent couple stays faithful. Padre Pio shook his head. Indifference is a kind of adultery, he said. It's the adultery of the heart. The spouse who is indifferent has already abandoned the marriage in every way that matters. They just haven't made it legal yet. And sometimes this is worse than outright betrayal, because betrayal at least acknowledges that the other person exists, that they matter enough to betray. Indifference says the other person doesn't matter at all. He went on to explain what he had observed in decades of hearing confessions. Marriages rarely died suddenly. They died slowly. First came the small negligences. The husband who stopped complimenting his wife. The wife who stopped asking about his day. The couple who stopped praying together. Who stopped talking about anything except logistics. Who stopped touching except when one wanted something from the other. These small deaths accumulated. And soon the marriage was a shell. Two people living parallel lives under the same roof. Co-parenting maybe. Cohabitating certainly. But not co-loving? Not anymore. And when physical intimacy happened in such marriages, Padre Pio said, it was often the saddest thing. Two people going through the motions, one demanding, the other submitting without joy. Or both participating out of a sense of obligation, but with their hearts elsewhere, with their minds on other things, with their souls disconnected from their bodies. This, Padre Pio would say, is not what God intended. This is not the one flesh union of Genesis. This is not the image of Christ in the church. This is two people using each other's bodies while their souls remain strangers. The friar who recorded this conversation noted that Padre Pio's face showed deep sorrow as he spoke, as though he carried the weight of all the broken marriages he had encountered, as though each loveless coupling he had heard confessed was a personal wound. And perhaps it was, because Padre Pio, despite his celibacy, understood marriage at a profound level. He understood it sacramentally. He understood that when a couple exchanged vows, they became living icons of Christ and the Church. And when they failed to live up to that calling, when they reduced the sacrament to a mere contract or convenience, they defaced the icon. They obscured the image of God that their union was meant to reveal. This is why he was so demanding in the confessional. This is why he sometimes refused absolution. Not because he was cruel, but because he knew that unless people truly understood the gravity of what they were doing, unless they truly repented, they would keep doing it. And each repetition would carve the sin deeper into their souls, making it harder to escape. There's a story from 1962. An elderly couple came to Padre Pio. They'd been married 40 years. The man was dying of cancer. They wanted Padre Pio's blessing. When Padre Pio met them, he took both their hands and held them together. He looked at them with such tenderness that witnesses said it was like watching a father look at his children. 40 years, Padre Pio said softly. Tell me, was it worth it? The woman began to cry. Every day, Father, every single day. The man, weak and thin, smiled. Even the hard days were worth it because we had each other. Padre Pio blessed them. Then he said something that everyone present remembered. This is how marriage should be. Two people who, after 40 years, still see each other as gifts, who still wake up grateful, who still give themselves freely. This is the image of Christ and his church. This is what the sacrament is meant to create. 2 weeks later, the man died. The woman wrote to Padre Pio, thanking him for his blessing. In her letter, she said something striking. She said that in their 40 years together, there were times when she wanted to leave. Times when her husband annoyed her so much she could barely stand to be in the same room. Times when physical intimacy felt like a burden. But every time she felt that way, she remembered something her mother had told her before the wedding. Your body is not your own anymore, and his body is not his own. You belong to each other, but belonging is not ownership. It's gift. Every day you give yourself to him. Every day he gives himself to you. And some days the giving will feel easy. Other days it will feel impossible. But you give anyway, because that's what love is. This woman, without knowing it, had articulated exactly what Padre Pio tried to teach in the confessional for 58 years. Love is gift. Marriage is gift. Your spouse's body is gift. And gifts are meant to be received with reverence, gratitude, and care. Not taken, not demanded, not possessed. Received. In 1967, the year before Padre Pio died, a young couple came to him engaged. They asked him for advice about marriage. Padre Pio was old by then, tired, carrying the weight of decades of suffering and ministry, but he smiled at them. Do you know what will destroy your marriage faster than anything else? He asked. They shook their heads. Thinking you deserve each other, Padre Pio said, the moment you think your spouse owes you something, you've stopped loving them. Love doesn't demand. Love gives. Love receives what is freely offered and offers what can be freely received. But the moment you start taking, you've stopped loving. He paused, then added, and especially in the marriage bed, that's where the truth of your love shows itself. Are you giving or taking? Are you serving or using? Are you seeing the image of God in your spouse, or are you seeing an object for your pleasure? The couple married 6 months later. Decades afterward, the wife said that Padre Pio's words saved them countless times. Whenever arguments arose about physical intimacy, whenever one of them felt used or neglected, they returned to that question. Am I giving or taking? Am I serving or using? And they found that when they chose to give, when they chose to serve, when they chose to see each other as unrepeatable gifts from God, everything else fell into place. Padre Pio died on September 23, 1968, at 2:30 in the morning. He was 81 years old. He had borne the stigmata, the wounds of Christ for 50 years. He had celebrated Mass for 58 years. He had heard confessions for nearly 6 decades. In those decades, he witnessed every form of human brokenness, but he also witnessed every form of human redemption. He saw marriages on the brink of collapse restored. He saw cold hearts softened. He saw selfish spouses transformed into generous lovers, because that's what grace does. It takes the parts of us that want to take, possess, and control, and it transforms them into parts that want to give, receive, and serve. The question Padre Pio would ask if he were in the confessional today is the same question he asked in 1920, in 1940, in 1960. When you approach your spouse, when you desire physical intimacy, when you think about your rights in marriage, what are you thinking about? Are you thinking about what you can get or what you can give? Are you thinking about your pleasure or your spouse's good? Are you thinking about your needs or the mystery of two becoming one flesh? Are you treating your spouse's body as a right you earn by saying vows, or as a gift that continues to be offered fresh every single day? A gift you must never take for granted, never treat carelessly, never abuse? These questions cut deep. They're meant to, because marriage is not a casual thing. It's not a contract for mutual benefit. It's a covenant that mirrors the relationship between Christ and the church. And Christ doesn't take from the church. He gives himself completely, holding nothing back, even unto death. That's the standard. That's the vision. That's what Padre Pio saw when he looked at married couples. Not what they were, but what they could become. Not the selfishness they showed, but the sanctity they were capable of. And when people came to him broken by years of treating each other poorly, he didn't just scold them, he gave them hope. He told them it wasn't too late. He told them grace was available. He told them that if they truly repented, if they truly changed their hearts, God would heal what seemed irreparable. There's a final story. A man came to Padre Pio in 1965. He'd been married 20 years. He admitted in confession that he'd treated his wife terribly for most of those years. Demanding, cold, selfish, especially in physical intimacy. She'd become depressed. Their children barely spoke to him. He'd finally realized, at age 52, that he'd destroyed his family through his selfishness. "Can this be fixed?" the man asked Padre Pio through tears. "Is it too late?" Padre Pio was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "It's never too late to start giving instead of taking. Go home. Ask your wife for forgiveness, not just with words, with actions. Show her over the next year that you finally understand, that she's a gift, that her body is sacred, that your marriage is holy, and if you do this sincerely, God will do the rest." The man did exactly that. He went home. He apologized. He changed. He started treating his wife with the tenderness he should have shown from the beginning. He started asking, not demanding. Serving, not using. Giving, not taking. Did it fix everything immediately? No. His wife was cautious. Their children were skeptical. But slowly, month by month, year by year, the marriage healed. The family healed. And 15 years later, when the man was 67 and his wife 65, they returned to San Giovanni, Rotondo together. Padre Pio was long dead by then, canonized in 2002. But they visited his tomb. They prayed there. They thanked him. Because the truth he taught them, the hard truth about marriage being gift and not possession, had saved them. That truth is still saving marriages today. Every time a husband asks instead of demands. Every time a wife gives freely instead of withholds resentfully. Every time a couple remembers that their bodies belong to God first, to each other second, and to themselves last. Every time selfishness is replaced with generosity. Every time possession is replaced with gift. Every time a spouse looks at their husband or wife and thinks not, "What can I get?" but "What can I give?" they participate in the vision Padre Pio fought for. The vision of marriage as it was meant to be. Two souls bound together. Two bodies given freely. Two hearts beating in sync. Two people who wake up every day and choose gift over possession. Love over selfishness. Service over use. This is the marriage that lasts. This is the marriage that sanctifies. This is the marriage that becomes an image of divine love. And this is the marriage Padre Pio could see even when the couples themselves couldn't. He saw past the sin to the potential, past the selfishness to the sanctity waiting to emerge, past the brokenness to the healing that grace could accomplish. In 2016, in the archives at San Giovanni Rotondo, a researcher found a letter Padre Pio had written to a married couple in 1953. The couple had asked him how to maintain a holy marriage. Padre Pio's response was simple but profound. He wrote this: "Remember every day that you're not lovers who happen to meet. You are collaborators with God in the work of creation. Your union makes visible the invisible love of the Trinity. Your bodies, given freely to each other, echo the eternal gift of the Father to the Son and the Son to the Father. Treat each other accordingly, with reverence, with gratitude, with the knowledge that what you hold is infinitely precious and must never be grasped, only received." That letter, faded and yellowed, sits now in a protective case. Thousands of pilgrims see it each year. Many of them are married couples struggling with the exact issues Padre Pio addressed: selfishness, coldness, the slow death of intimacy when it becomes mechanical rather than sacramental. And when they read his words, something shifts. They remember, they repent, they return home determined to see their spouse differently, to treat their spouse's body not as a right, but as a continuously offered gift requiring continuously renewed gratitude. This is Padre Pio's legacy in marriage. Not just his refusal to give absolution for contraception, though that's part of it. Not just his insistence that matrimony is for children, though that's essential. But his deeper insistence that marriage is about the transformation of selfishness into love. And that transformation happens one choice at a time, one moment at a time, one act of giving instead of taking, one decision to serve instead of use, one choice to seek gift instead of right. 56 years after Padre Pio's death, his message hasn't changed because human nature hasn't changed. We still struggle with the same temptations, the same selfishness, the same tendency to view our spouse as existing for our benefit rather than as a unique, unrepeatable gift entrusted to our care. But the grace to overcome that selfishness is still available. The sacrament of marriage still pours out the strength needed to love sacrificially. The example of Christ still shows us what total self-gift looks like. And somewhere, from paradise, Padre Pio still intercedes for married couples, still prays that they'll understand, still hopes that they'll choose gift over possession, love over selfishness, sanctity over sin, because that's what marriage was always meant to be, a school of charity, a crucible of holiness, a place where two selfish people learn to become two saints by the daily practice of dying to themselves and rising to new life in service to each other. That's the vision. That's the goal. That's what Padre Pio saw and what he spent 58 years trying to help people achieve. Treat your spouse's body as a gift, not a right. Never a right. Always a gift. And if you've forgotten that, if you've fallen into the trap of possession, of demand, of selfishness, it's not too late. Padre Pio would tell you what he told countless others. Repent, confess, change. Start giving instead of taking. Start serving instead of using. Start loving the way Christ loves, and watch what happens. Watch how grace heals. Watch how marriages transform. Watch how the sacrament, lived properly, creates saints, 2 at a time.